I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster.
I am now the White House counsel. Watch my face. That's what that person's face did when he said that. Look, you have to look at the law and the politics on this move. First, the law. Just minutes after declaring a national emergency, the president admitted to the world there isn't one at the border. I didn't need to do this. You're going to see those words. You're going to hear them in legal challenges, especially from the Democrats. And we have the man who's the tip of that spear, House Judiciary Committee Chair Jerry Nadler. Welcome back. Perfect timing.
Good to see you.
I got lucky with you tonight. So, do you believe that those words will weigh heavy in any legal reckoning of the move?
They certainly will, because the lawsuit will say that there is no real emergency, and he'll say there's a real emergency. And the defense will be that the president decides whether there's an emergency. The court can't look behind that. And here the president is saying there's no real emergency.
Right.
That's a body blow to his case.
Because the strongest part would be what you're saying. This has never been challenged. It's seen as open-ended. Emergency isn't even defined. And in statutory matters, if it's not defined, you go with the definition of the person empowered to make it, but he just defined it with his
words. The court might
words.
say that it's a political question between the two branches of government,
Right.
and the court won't object to it. But if the president admitted up front that it's a political stunt and not a real emergency, I think that's very difficult.
Now, you asked for answers.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to know, and what happens if the White House says, we're not answering your questions? Sue us.
Well, we asked for a list of questions. Who advised them, what the advice was, did they consider certain things, and so forth. I don't really expect to get answers. This White House is very arrogant and not going to give us answers. We will, Congress is adjourned for the week. We're out next week, but as soon as we come back, I am sure we will pass a resolution of disapproval in the House, pursuant to the emergency statutes, that mandates under the emergency statute that the Senate consider the emergency disapproval within 15 days without any ability to filibuster. I anticipate there'll be a majority vote in both houses to disapprove the resolution.
A majority vote in both houses. You think that there are enough Republicans to go against this president, something they've never done before?
I think so. I can't be certain of that, but I think so, because you heard some of their statements. I mean, they're terrified of this, and rightly so. If the president can declare an emergency today on this, the Democratic president can decide that, as you mentioned, the 40,000 people a year killed in this country is a crisis, and why don't we take everybody's guns away, or force everybody to register their guns, or ban all assault rifles, or do all of that without congressional approval? I mean, this opens up tyranny or dictatorship, and now it may be something that the Republicans don't particularly oppose, but tomorrow the Democratic president could be something they hate. So it's a tremendous shift of power from Congress to the president, and they can't like this.
But the ultimate thing will be either you win in court, and by any case, you're going to have layers of delay. All right? You're going to say this wasn't an emergency. You fight it out. He appeals it. If he loses, okay. Then he has to find land. That's going to be a problem.
But I am pretty confident we will win in court, because there are two layers, one of which nobody has talked about. Layer number one is it a valid emergency? And the court might find that it's not for the court to answer, that it's up to the president.
Right.
But the second layer is these pots of money that he's using are military pots of money. Under the Emergency Act, they can only be used for military purposes. The military is prohibited by law from enforcing domestic law. The military cannot enforce our immigration laws. They cannot enforce our drug laws. Therefore, by definition, there is no military purpose, and I don't see how we can use these funds.
Well, that's why he said the military came to me and said the physical barriers would be much more important than what the money was already allocated for in the statute, that 248 that he's using. The Secretary of Defense makes the call.
That may be, but important for what? Important to enforce immigration laws, to enforce anti-drug laws. Those are laws the military is prohibited by law from enforcing.
What a sticky situation, legally, but certainly politically. Let me get your head on something else, though, that's going to come under your jurisdiction. So,
but before we do that, let me just say, this is perhaps one of the largest challenges to the constitutional order in American history. If he gets away with this, presidents become much more powerful. This destroys the separation of power to a large extent, and riddles the Constitution.
Why
It
is it
cannot be
different than any
permitted
other executive action like DACA or anything else?
Because it is displacing the congressional power of the purse, which is the chief power of Congress.
Instead of just making an order that this will be, it's paying for it as well.
It's
So
paying
you're going
for it.
around the article.
It's paying for it in direct contravention of the language in the Constitution that says no money shall be drawn from the Treasury except by appropriation by Congress.
All right, so then we're going to have to see how that plays out and stay on it, see if you get any respect to your inquiries. Not a great track record there. Whitaker, that hearing was a little bit of a mess, and now we find out that Whitaker is going to stay in the DOJ. Your reaction?
Well, we've sent a letter to Whitaker. Some of what he said was apparently not true. We have witnesses to contradict some of what he said to the committee.
Not true, but he may not have understood that, or do you think he made an intentional false statement to Congress?
He may have made an intentional false statements to Congress.
That's a crime,
yes,
if you refer it.
Yes. Well, we've invited him to meet with us to clarify it.
All right, well, we've got to keep track of that also. Roger Stone. Now, up to this point, correct me if I'm wrong on this, it has been about in the Mueller pleadings who Stone had gone to try to get to find out what WikiLeaks had and to put it out. But then in this pleading today, where they were fighting with some inside point with Stone about whether the matter is related to the overall investigation or not, they say, and in our search warrants, which we used in both of these cases that are relevant to this discussion, we found communications between Stone and Guccifer, who winds up being the Russians, and Organization One, which we believe is WikiLeaks. Did you know that there had been anything that the probe thinks is proof of Stone directly communicating with WikiLeaks?
No, we didn't know this. This is why this may be why the president was so upset at the execution of the search warrants at Roger Stone's house, because that's where they found all this material. Although it's interesting because in the filings today, apparently the special prosecutor said that they got this information both from the information they had with respect to the GRU, the people they indicted, the Russians. They had it from that end, but they also seemed to have it from the end of documents found in Stone's house, which tied Stone directly to discussing with the Russians how best to release the material, how best, meaning to the greatest maximal damage to Hillary's campaign, to release the materials stolen by the Russians from the Democratic National Committee.
So the legal distinction would be, it's one thing if I say, well, forget about me as a journalist. Let's say I'm someone helping a candidate, whether I'm in the campaign or not, to say, hey, Jerry, I heard you got this stuff. Let me have it. And let me help you put it out as part of what you're trying to do through your theft of the same. Those are different legally, are they not? If I'm trying to help you
if you're trying to
distribute versus just trying to get them for my own purpose.
Well, that the latter certainly makes you a participant in the crime.
Right, but you'd have to prove it.
You'd have to prove it. What they are alleging here in these allegations is that they have the proof in the form of tapes and other documentary evidence that Stone, on behalf of the campaign, was conspiring with the Russians to do this. This is a direct connect. This is the missing link. This, if true, it's the direct connection of the campaign conspiring with the Russians, of the Trump campaign conspiring with the Russians.
Where do you think we wind up? Because after the probe puts out its report, hopefully we get it. That answer seems to get more and more cloudy. Luckily you guys are starting to ask some questions about it. But the report comes out at some point. You have to get it in primary substance. What do you think will happen next?
Depends what all the evidence shows. Depends what all the evidence shows. I mean, we have to get this report out to the American people so that they know it. Unfortunately, the regulations under which this special prosecutor is operating are not the same under which Ken Jaworski operated, which said you must have a report to Congress. This simply says a report to the Attorney General. We will get that material out one way or the other. If he refuses to get it out, our committee will subpoena it. We can invite Mueller to testify. We'll get it out. I also think that when you start seeing this kind of thing put out here, this is Mueller getting out the story before that report.
Well, he's been redacting a lot of stuff, if anything.
Yeah, but he's showing a lot of material, and we'll see more of that. But we have to get all this material because we have to see, Richard Nixon famously said, the American people have to know whether their president is a crook.
Right.
That was true then, it's true now.
Do you believe at the end of the day that this will be a reflection of not just the actions of those around the president, but the president himself?
I do believe that because it's hard to believe that the president sits on top of a pinnacle in which all the top people are conspiring with the Russians or seeking to conspire with the Russians. Almost all of them are indicted or convicted for, among other things, lying about contacts with the Russians, and he knows nothing about it.
Not all, but many. You're
And
right.
he's the only person who knows nothing about it. It's difficult to believe.
But in that
That's
context, we'll
different from
only
saying
know
it-
what you can show.
Yes, saying it's difficult to believe is different from saying I can prove it.
Right. And that's going to be a meaningful distinction as we go forward. This was a very fruitful conversation on a Friday night. So many pressing matters. Thank you for helping us understand
you.
them better. Be well.